How big of a hole will Jonathon Brooks' injury leave on the Panthers roster in 2025? And sitting at 3-10, is this actually the best case scenario for the Panthers? I'll answer those questions here on this weekly Wednesday Mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council. Why? Because on Wednesdays throughout the entirety of the regular season, and it looks like we only have 3 more games left after this week, I'll be right here answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in. And then once we get to the off season, we'll go back to the weekly Friday mailbag, but 3 more Wednesdays after today for the weekly Wednesday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And the weekly Wednesday mailbag is back once again here on the show, and we're going to discuss Jonathon Brooks, his injury, what impact it's going to have on the Panthers remaining this season and potentially in 2025 as he tears his ACL for the second time in 13 months. Talked a lot about that on yesterday's show. We can talk more about it today and the implications for Carolina this season and moving forward. Bryce Young, he's been playing really well, and people are wondering, the Panthers sitting in the top 10 of the draft right now, according to Tankathon.com, or not top 10, top 5 of the draft, according to Tankathon.com. Maybe this is the best case for scenario for Carolina. And what could the future be for Brad Idzik here as Panthers OC? And maybe one day the Panthers play caller. But we'll start off by talking about Jonathon Brooks. Just a devastating injury for the Carolina Panthers, second-round pick out of Texas there at running back position, taken 46th overall, battled all off season long to be ready to go for Carolina. Was not able to play until a couple weeks ago, making his debut against Kansas City. Showed some of that burst that we saw from him at Texas last year when he was the main guy getting his opportunity once Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson both moved on to the NFL to play for the Falcons and Bears respectively. Goes down, unfortunately, but comes back, looked good, and then first carry, first touch of the game on Sunday when he was out there offensively for the Panthers, makes a cut, tears his right ACL, the second time he's torn that ACL in that right knee in 13 months, and just awful to see for a guy who, by all accounts, has been a great teammate, is a great human being, and I feel for him. But we are wondering, what does this mean for the organization moving forward, as it looks like they're going to be without their second-round pick, not just for the rest of the season, but for the vast majority of next year, meaning the first 2 years in the NFL for Jonathon Brooks here in Carolina would basically be a wash. And Jake is asking that question right now, looking ahead to 2025, asking, did Jonathon Brooks' injury create another hole in the running back room in terms of addressing the position in the offseason? Well, in the interim, Carolina has Chuba Hubbard. They have Raheem Blackshear, who's dealing with a chest injury. They have Mike Boone on the practice squad, and it's likely that he will be elevated to the active roster, whether it just be a standard elevation or if they sign him to the active roster. Tuesday, they did bring Velus Jones Jr. Off of the Jaguars practice squad. He's more of a returner than a running back. Played wide receiver at Tennessee, was drafted in the 4th round by the Bears, now has been spending most of the season with Jacksonville, but he's going to come in, I think, more likely to be the replacement if Raheem Blackshear is not able to go this upcoming Sunday in the return game, as Blackshear has been the primary punt returner and kick returner for the Panthers this season. So that's what I expect Velus Jones Jr. to do for Carolina. But as far as running back, Mike Boone, they can go ahead and they can elevate him probably on Saturday, since they did not do that on Tuesday. I would imagine if they didn't do it Tuesday, probably something they're going to do over the weekend once they head into that game at home against Dallas on Sunday. But as far as creating a hole on the roster next year. Well, good thing is Carolina was able to sign Chuba Hubbard to a 4-year, $33 million deal that can go to $37 million if he is able to hit certain incentives, and he's getting paid $15 million fully guaranteed, really meaning that it's a 2-year, $15 million deal for Chuba Hubbard here in Carolina. And y'all know how I feel about paying running backs. Looking at that situation, I felt a little bit differently considering just how hard Chuba Hubbard has worked in trying to establish his culture in Carolina, his buy-in, and he's been outstanding this year. And that's a guy that I loved coming out of Oklahoma State. And it's not like he's had a ton of mileage in the NFL, as he was not the lead guy his rookie year, even though he had to step up when Christian McCaffrey hurt his hamstring in that game. On that Thursday night football game in Texas against Houston. And then he had to step up again once they got rid of McCaffrey, but it was more of him being the 1B, but really the number 2 back behind Deontay Foreman last year. Midway through the season, once he beat out Miles Sanders for the first time, he was the lead back. And he came into this season clearly as that dude, and he's run for over 1,000 yards, and he has absolutely earned that deal. So I didn't hate it. Makes sense, especially now that, well, you're not going to have Jonathon Brooks out there next season for the majority of the time. He took over a calendar year to be able to be ready to play this season. And if it goes like that again next year, he'll be back right around week 14 or week 15 rather, and there'll only be 4 games left. And I don't know how much sense it would make for the Panthers to throw him back out there. They may have just to wait until 2026. And that is a tough situation for this team to be in right now. Chuba's under contract, looking at the rest of the roster next year, because let me see, Raheem Blackshear, his situation, he is going to be an exclusive rights free agent after, he's going to be a restricted free agent after the season. So Carolina can go out there and give him a qualifying offer if they want to, and that wouldn't be a ton of money if they do that. So they could bring him back, but he'd be more of a returner. I would think that what Carolina needs to do is go find a veteran, kind of stop that gap guy to be your number 2 next year behind Chuba Hubbard, and that guy you pay basically league minimum, federal minimum wage, no overtime, no holiday pay. You know, the whole deal at this point in time when it comes to being running backs. I just think that they should do that. Or maybe you think about Brooks now having 2 ACL tears in that same knee. Is he ever going to be the guy you hoped he would be out of Texas? And it looked like he could have been based off of how we look coming back. But now a second injury to that same knee, I don't really know if it's going to happen and what the likelihood of someone being the player they were before the injuries after that happens. But I'm sure it's pretty, I'm not saying, I don't know if it's low or not, but it probably is unlikely, just conventional wisdom speaking there. So we'll see what they decide to do. But yeah, it certainly is going to leave a hole. I know a lot of people are excited about potentially a smash and dash 2.0 situation in Carolina next year with Jonathon Brooks and Chuba Hubbard. Looks like that's going to have to wait now until at least 2026, which certainly is depressing for the organization, but really for Jonathon Brooks and all of you out there who are excited about the possibility of that being the case moving forward here in Carolina. But yeah, hole on the roster. The great thing is they got Chuba Hubbard signed up for at least the next 2 years. That'll definitely be here. Maybe he gets to live out the lifetime of that contract now, and they'll have to address it likely in free agency by trying to find a cheap option. I think that makes the most sense, as you will still want to be dedicated to Brooks and Hubbard in 2026. No reason necessarily to go go draft somebody in the 4th or 5th, whatever round you want to do, a day 3 kind of guy, because that's what makes the most sense to me. If they're going to draft a running back, get someone later on when you clearly already have an investment with your starter Chuba and then your future starter in Jonathon Brooks if everything works out in the future. So we'll see how things play out in the offseason as far as running back position goes down here in Carolina. Bryce Young's been playing really well lately, and he has earned the right to start the next 4 games, and he has probably earned right to start in 2025. At least it's trending that way. And the Panthers are still 3-10, but they're close in these games. Bryce leading down the field. Is this actually the best case scenario? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Listen up, renters. Ever feel like you're stuck in this loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air? It's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Built Rewards comes in. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent every month. Pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards a flight or a hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them toward a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guys and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent right now when you join built.com/LockedOnNFL. That's JOIBILT.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Join built.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. All right, back here on the weekly Wednesday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. Only 3 more weekly mailbags here on Wednesdays throughout the rest of the regular season. Then we shift over to the weekly Friday mailbag. Throughout the majority of the offseason, we'll take a break during the summer months, then come back right as training camp is starting up. So going to be transitioning there, unfortunately, again, early on in January. But soon, I think we'll be able to have the weekly Wednesday mailbag, maybe one day soon, throughout the entire month of January. But we'll find out down the road as Panthers try to turn things around, which at least on the field effort-wise, production-wise, especially at the quarterback position and Bryce Young, it seems like that future now is a lot more feasible than it felt like a couple of months ago when Bryce Young was benched, and it looked like he was headed towards an exit out of Carolina after the season. But things have turned around over the last month plus here in Charlotte, and Brandon wants to talk about that and how this may actually be the best case scenario for the Panthers moving forward. Brandon saying, do you think the outcome of the last few games could be a best case scenario? We are seeing a confident Bryce Young, much more competent offense, and a much improved defense while still maintaining position for an early draft pick. Now, Brandon, I wouldn't say it's a much improved defense, but it's not like they're getting completely gashed in all facets. So yes, it has improved to some extent, especially as pass rushing goes. While losing is almost never a good thing, Brandon says. Is being able to finally enjoy Panthers football and potentially have a top 5 pick the ideal scenario since we were out of playoff contention? Well, technically not out of it just yet, have not been eliminated. And I believe they can still stay alive with the win on Sunday against Dallas. If they lose, then yeah, I think that's going to be it for Carolina. Atlanta's 6-7. They cannot be anything. Well, I guess if they lose, then you would still be in it. But Tampa Bay, you need them to kind of come back to the field at this point at 7-6. So yeah, if Tampa wins, well, at 7-6, no, the Tampa Bay cannot. Yeah, if you lose, you're out because Tampa cannot lose 11 games this season. Where Carolina, if they lose on Sunday, that would be 11 losses. So they're still in contention. It's not over yet, but yeah, probably not going to happen, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it sucks that they're losing these close games against KC, a game that they could have won, 2 games that they should have won, in my opinion, based off of how things ended there against Tampa, where they dominated for 3 quarters, then defensively could not get a stop. The offense goes down the field, gets the touchdown that they needed to go ahead. Defense, unfortunately, does not get the stop there as Tampa Bay is able to kick that field goal at the end of regulation. Then the defense actually gets a stop, but the offense fumbles it away, unfortunately. And, well, we all know what happened there as Tampa Bay kicks the ball to win it on a walk-off field goal. Second week in a row, Panthers lost that way. Then on Sunday, I mean, Philly ran for a ton of yardage. Not surprised by that, but I think defensively, Carolina kind of was not bad. We knew they were going to be a lot on the ground. Not like Philly tried to throw the ball that much, but it wasn't like Carolina was getting killed when it came to yardage on Sunday. And even despite the turnover by Bryce and some of the issues, of course, on defense, they were able to still have an opportunity to win that game, whereas Bryce really let him down the field, 97 yards. They really just could not hold on to what could have been the go-ahead game-winning touchdown in that game. So they have been close, and it is outstanding to see the way that Bryce Young has led this team, and he's been a big reason, maybe the reason, in a lot of these games they've even been there at the end with an opportunity to beat teams like Philadelphia, like Kansas City, and to a lesser extent, Tampa Bay, who should win the NFC South this season. Like, that is far more important than, I guess, winning games, considering the totality of things here with this organization and where they've been this year. We're losing Shaq Thompson, having to bench Bryce, losing Derek Brown. Still a lot of questions about just the overall talent level that is here on this team. There's areas that they're going to have to improve. So to have your quarterback look like he's worth at least keeping around for another season and may end up being the answer long term, and still be in position to improve your team in the top 5 with a really good player, like, yeah, that is somewhat of an ideal scenario. Now, ideally for me, I would have preferred Carolina close out that game against Kansas City, to have beaten Tampa Bay, to have also won that game on Sunday against Philadelphia. And if that's the case, based off of the other results within the division, Carolina's sitting there tied with Atlanta and Tampa at 6-7, and in a spot to potentially win the NFC South heading into the final 4 weeks of the season. Like, that's an ideal scenario, that your quarterback is the reason that you're in these games, and then winning these games with a game-tying drive against Kansas City. Defense gets a stop. They win that game, maybe in overtime. He gets the game-winning drive there against Tampa. Defense gets a stop. Leggett catches that ball on Sunday, and 6-7, you're right there with 3 huge wins against 2 teams in Philly and Tampa, not Philly and Tampa, Philly and Kansas City, that feel like they're Super Bowl contenders. And if that's the case, you feel like you're beating Dallas, you feel like you're beating Arizona, and you feel pretty damn good about beating but Tampa and Atlanta as well. So that, to me, winning division, Bryce looking like this and making it very clear, yeah, I'm that guy moving forward, that would have been the ideal scenario, because we have seen over the years the Panthers have lost a lot of games, and they have picked in the top 5 and the top 10 plenty of times, and here they sit at 3-10. Losing has not gotten them anywhere with all those draft picks, and some of the guys that have been successful draft picks there in the first round are no longer here. So the quarterback playing well and actually winning games and being in position to make the playoffs, to me, that would be the ideal scenario, because the point of all of this is to win games. But I certainly understand where you're coming from. Like, if you're not going to win the games, you would at least want the quarterback to play well and then be in position to maybe get a defensive tackle like Mason Graham out of Michigan, or an edge rusher like Abdul Carter out of Penn State. There you go. There's your draft takes. I know a lot of you guys keep asking me about those, and I know it's a popular conversation to have, unfortunately, because this team is bad every year. And I have to ask my colleagues over some of the other podcasts like Locked On Chiefs, do you guys ever get draft questions in December, or is everyone just focused on like the playoffs, which unfortunately we're never allowed to focus on here in Carolina? I got to start asking some of these guys if they ever get those questions. But seemingly every year people forget. Coaching changes, that happens before the draft. Re-signing your players that are on your roster right now happens before the draft. Free agency happens before the draft. Like, 3 pretty important areas. So let's focus on those, and then we'll get to the end of March and we'll really focus in on what's going to happen in the draft for Carolina. Like, I cannot answer these questions because I have no idea who's coaching this defense next season and what the scheme's going to be. I have no idea who they're going to re-sign and extend. I have no idea who they're going to go sign in free agencies. Therefore, I have no idea what position they should target in the top 5 of the draft. Brian has another question. Basically, well, actually, I'll hold off on Brian's question. We'll take a quick pause and come back, and we'll answer more of your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. Hey, Locked On Panther fans, I know you're like me and your holiday shopping list is, let's just say, far from complete. Well, if that's the case, I've got the perfect gift for the passionate sports fans in your life. Perhaps you've heard of the Ice Shaker. Ice Shaker is now officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, NCAA, and MLB, and will make the ideal gift. Created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers, Ice Shakers has sold over 1 million bottles. They have changed the game of workout bottles, and this is the gift you've been looking for. Go to iceshaker.com and use code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout to save 25% 25% off your order. They're kitchen-grade stainless steel bottles that won't absorb odor like the plastic bottles do. A patented twist-in agitator that breaks up powders but is silent when you shake it instead of the annoying ball. The agitator works as a strainer as well and makes it a very solid tailgating cup to mix in drinks. Order your team-branded bottles today at iceshaker.com and use code LOCKEDONNFL for 25% off your order. Ice Shakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market. Ice Shakers. A pair of questions here before we get out on this weekly Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers. Brian, a similar question to Brandon about, is this the best case scenario for the Panthers, that Bryce Young's playing well, they're still losing games, they're in the top 5, a roster that still is largely devoid of talent, can get more players. And that is the argument against what I said earlier, that I would prefer Bryce be playing like this. They won those last 3 games and they're tied with Tampa and New Orleans. And not New Orleans and Atlanta. And I'm sure y'all actually would rather be in that position. But we also do not understand that, man, if they would have won those games, the defensive line still needs a lot more talent. They still probably need to add more talent, obviously, at tight end. And they're not going to figure out what they got to do at running back, receiver. They need to add some more talent there. Like, there are still areas on this roster that must be improved. Carolina is going to be a consistent winner. So while it would have been great to watch the turnaround, it may be better. And I understand where you're coming from, even though I disagree, because the best thing is winning games, and especially if your quarterback's playing the way that Bryce has been playing, than losing and then being in the top 5 and drafting a good player who could help you. As we've seen, that has not resulted into any sort of long-term success for the Panthers the last couple of seasons. But maybe it finally changes as Dan Morgan, well, y'all said a couple weeks ago you like the draft class. Now I've been seeing people saying Legette's a bust and Jonathon Brooks, way to waste of a pick there. That is. So those are your words, not mine. A lot of y'all's words. So maybe you're not feeling Dan Morgan in the rookie class anymore. Over to Brian, who again has a similar question about Bryce Young and where the Panthers are. What if this season isn't so much about wins/losses, but about making the Panthers a respectable franchise once again? Seems since bringing back Bryce Young, national media has seemed to do a 180 on what they thought of the Panthers, who are the laughingstock of the league. And now I'm seeing people say that we are fun to watch. We're the only team with no primetime games this season. Could this change in national reputation lead to some primetime games in the future? Also, thinking about the impact this could have on potential future free agents. Well, here's the case, man. If your team loses a ton and spends what the Panthers spent to get up to number 1, and Bryce Young plays as bad as he plays, not a lot of people are going to say positive things about you. That's just how things work. If you look bad, you make bad decisions, at least perceived bad decisions, in all aspects of life, you're going to be criticized. That's just how things work in life. And for whatever reason, people have a hard time grasping that. Oh, if you do stupid things, people are going to tell you you're stupid? What? How is that a thing that's possible in the world? But yeah, the Panthers, they look like they had given up on him after 2 weeks. He did not look good, and certainly made a lot of sense from that perspective of how poorly he was playing to bench Bryce Young in that scenario. And you look at what CJ Stroud did. Like, there were a lot of factors and variables playing into why the national media, looking at this team, thought the Panthers were a joke. Look at the owner. Look at some of the things they've been doing in the past. Look who's no longer on the roster in pursuit of this quarterback who was benched after 2 weeks, and makes it very clear why positive things weren't said about this team. Things that you guys also weren't saying about the team. You weren't saying, oh, yeah, things are great. You were saying, oh, no, this team's terrible. What the hell, David Tepper? But yeah, they've done a 180 because Bryce has done a 180. He has looked good. He has really looked confident. This team has been better. They've improved throughout the season. The effort and the energy has always been there, but we're seeing better results on the field as far as the execution. Even though it's not enough to win these last 3 games, they aren't getting blown out. It's far more fun to lose the way they're losing the last couple weeks than to lose 47-10 or 26-3 or get blown out 40-7 in Washington, 36-10 in Chicago. If that happens to you, well, it's hard to say anything positive. But when you play against these teams they played against, like you have, and you're right there in position to win these games and should have won at least 2 of them, there's going to be a sea change in how you're perceived. And maybe that ends up more primetime games. I'll quite honestly say, for me, doing this podcast, 1 o'clock Eastern time, totally fine up by me. Don't need to stay up until 1 a.m. For primetime games. Like I don't want to play on Thursday. If they go to primetime, the only game I really care about when it comes to primetime that shows that you actually are a property that the league cares about is Sunday Night Football. Don't need Monday night. Definitely don't want Thursday night. Give me Sunday Night Football. I'm all for that. Absolutely. Just for what I do here. I had a routine for 1 o'clock. So I'm totally fine with that. But we'll see if it changes. And as far as free agency goes, now that Bryce is playing this well, it's going to make a receiver, maybe like a T. Higgins, actually want to come here instead of before where it's like, okay, who's playing? Because we were talking about Deontay Johnson and where the Panthers should trade him. The Panthers had benched Bryce Young at that point in time. Dave Canales gave you no indication that he was going to go back to Bryce Young at all. He was talking about Andy Dalton, and Andy wasn't going to be the quarterback next year in all likelihood. And if you don't know who the quarterback's going to be and what the longevity of staff's going to be, then it's kind of hard to sign up. But now when you see that this is going to be the quarterback, Bryce Young, likely next season, and how he's improved, it kind of makes you want to go with Carolina. So that could help out potentially once they get to the offseason, for sure, Brian. And we'll see how the schedule plays out. They're probably going to still have a ton of 1 o'clock games. They're still a 3-10 team. So understand that. If they end up 6-11, which would be great, I don't know if that is going to make them any more attractive, even if Bryce has played well, because they're still not going to be a team that is going to get a ton of attention just for how poorly they played over the last couple of years. And there's just other markets, other properties, and understand ratings is very important. And if the NFL does not think the Panthers will rate, they will not put them there. But even though it doesn't matter because it's the NFL, everything rates when it comes to professional football on television. Last question coming from Sean. He's asking about Brad Idzik, which is like the first time anyone's specifically asked about Brad Idzik, I think, since like the season began on this show. Sean saying, with the offense making strides finally, I feel like there's a cog in a machine that we've all forgotten about. We haven't had much of a reason to talk about Brad Idzik as he's been a bystander for most of the season. He's not a bystander. He's just not a play caller. It does not mean he's not a part of the game plan, that he's not actively out there with those guys on the practice field throughout the week in meeting rooms. He's not a bystander. Just because you don't call plays does not make you a bystander. Just to get that one out there for folks. But going back to what Sean had to say, what do you think the plan is for increasing Idzik's role in calling plays for the offense in the future? Do you think that is even in the plans, or will Dave Canales continue to call plays for the rest of his career here in Carolina? I have no idea if that is in the plans, and it's not something that Dave Canales has come out and said that he wants to one day hand over the reins to Brad Idzik. Completely different scenario than the one last year where Frank Reich came out and said very early that he was going to one day give up play calling to Thomas Brown when he felt like Thomas Brown was ready. And after 6 games of the Panthers losing and the offense looking terrible, he gave it over to Thomas Brown, and it still looked bad. And if you watch the Bears on Sunday, doesn't look like Thomas Brown has improved that much as a play caller. Not to say that the guy can't be a good coach, because the NFLPA survey last year said that he's one of the top 5 coordinators in the league, and that's because players really like him. And there was talk of in Chicago that maybe he could be the replacement. Maybe he can be the replacement to Matt Eberflus up there. But if he's calling the plays, that's probably not the best scenario for Chicago Bears moving forward. But we'll see. Like Canales, I think, has done a fine job. This is like happens every year now. It feels like in Carolina, y'all want to change the play caller, and they fired Joe Brady. That did nothing. They fired Frank Reich and put Thomas Brown. That did nothing. And I don't think going to Brad Idzik, who's never called plays, just like Thomas Brown had never called plays, is going to be like some magical elixir to the Panthers offense in the future. Maybe it will be. But I think until it gets to that point where this offense is just terrible, can't move the ball, which is not where they're at all right now, I would think that Dave Canales is going to call the plays. And we have seen coaches get hired elsewhere who were not calling the plays at their previous stop. Kevin O'Connell was not calling the plays in LA. He's doing a pretty damn good job there in Minnesota. We saw, Doug Peterson was not calling the plays in Kansas City, won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia. Matt Nagy, he didn't call the plays, didn't really have a lot of success in Chicago. Now, he did go to the playoffs one year with Mitch Trubisky. So that's something to talk about. And Bieniemy didn't call plays for a while. Then he called plays like last year, and Sam Howell threw for a decent amount of yards as the quarterback of the Washington Commanders. So you don't have to call the plays to be successful elsewhere. And Frank Smith, someone up and down in Miami, who will be someone that people will target as a head coach after the season potentially. He's not calling the plays. a lot of guys in spots aren't calling the plays, but are still able to have success in their next stop. So we'll see how this matures over the year, but I don't know. He has not given any indication that he's going to go to him. It sounds like this is Dave's job. And I think a big part of Tepper hiring Dave, aside from working with the quarterback, was for him to call the plays. So we'll see how that works out down the road. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter, @Julian Council, where I will be back again next Wednesday answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. I'll be back here tomorrow talking to either Landon McCool or Marcus Mosher, or maybe both, from Locked On Cowboys for our Locked On NFL Crossover Thursday, presented by our friends over at Prize Picks.